Welcome to Maintaining a Balance video 16. In this video, we're going to be discussing how plants regulate salt concentrations, specifically in estuary environments, and we're going to look at the definition of enantiostasis, which is the dot point which I'm going to be covering today, and we're going to the deep process that plants employ to make sure that they regulate their salt so that it doesn't affect their metabolism in the way that they function. Enantiostasis is maintenance of metabolic and physiological functions in response to variation in the environment. So specifically in this video, we're talking about the variations in salt and water concentrations, but enantiostasis is a word that can be used to describe any kind of responses in variations in their environment. The ability of an organism to survive in the environment where salt and water concentrations changes throughout the day, so we use the word fluctuation, will really depend on whether they avoid them or tolerate them. And if they aren't able to do either of those things, then we usually see that those organisms are unable to survive in that environment. An estuary sees daily changes in salt concentrations due to changes in tides. So at high tide, there's high salt concentration because there's more of the ocean and the salt water in the estuary environment, and that causes, as we know from previous discussions, it causes the water to move out of the cells to maintain that balance in salt and water concentrations. At low tide, we see the ocean and the salt water move back out to sea, and we see an influx of fresh water. So that means that the salt concentrations are quite low, and due to that, we see water moving into living tissues. So in terms of organisms, there are two strategies that they employ to survive. So we can look at osmoconformers, and that means that they're able to modify the salt concentrations within their body to their external conditions, and that means that there is no movement of water in and out of their body. An example of that is a fiddler crab, which that they can have an equal concentration inside their body and it is outside the body, and so that means that they can both retain and excrete excess salt when it's required. And then we have on the opposite an osmoregulator. So that means that they keep their bodies at the same concentration, and that they're unable to or unable to tolerate the difference of salt concentrations. So this means that they change their body processes to counteract that difference in the salt concentrations in their external environment. Make sure you refer to this when you're doing the Google Doc activity that's later on in this lesson. And then we go on to talk about plants and how they regulate salt. So we call halophytes plants that are adapted to saline environments, so high salt concentrations. So similarly to osmoconformers and osmoregulators, we have salt-tolerant plants and salt-avoidant plants. So some salt-tolerant plants are mangroves, and we see those in high populations in estuary environments. And so that we know that plants have vacuoles, but specifically in mangroves, they're able to increase the amount of water that's stored in their vacuoles, which means that they avoid the changes in salt, so the salt isn't necessarily moving into the plant. And then on the other hand, we have salt avoidant plants like saltbush, and they have a range of adaptations to balance the salt concentrations, and we can see that the bladder cell, which is where the vacuole is located, can sometimes be a place where salt is stored, and when there's too much salt in that cell, the cell actually bursts, which releases that salt concentration from the plant itself. Thank you for watching video 16. Make sure you tune in for the last video of Maintaining a Balance video 17.